You are here, hopefully, in the right place for the Alliant 3 webinar. Today, we're going to give you a quick recap of the draft RFP, as well as share some market insights, because we at Trident have been monitoring the GWACs. We're coming off of Polaris right now. Obviously, Oasis Plus, the draft RFP for that just came out yesterday. So we are knee-deep in GWACs right now. So we just wanted to share with you some thoughts about what's going on and what we think might happen, so that you can prep for the next 6 to 9 months of adventure here as we roll along. So today we're going to give you just a real quick intro to Trident Proposal Management. If you're not familiar with us, if you haven't worked with us before, we're going to do a little bit of an overview of the Alliant program history and kind of how we got here. Like I mentioned, we're going to do a quick summary of the opportunity itself and what we know so far. Alexis is going to share some great market insights. And then we're just going to leave you with a couple key takeaways, next step type recommendations of what we would like to see you do to succeed going forward. So with that, a little bit about Trident. We are a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business. We were founded back in 2008. We're based in San Diego, but we have a globally dispersed team. So we provide largely virtual support all over the world. We have a lot of veterans and military spouses on the team, so we can provide 24/7 coverage because we are everywhere you are. We do provide the full business development life cycle support, so everything from business intelligence, right, getting a sense of the market, what's happening out there, who's buying, what they're buying. Then we can transition into capture management, actually helping you prepare and position for an opportunity that you decide to pursue, and then carrying through to the actual proposal development and management, making sure that you prepare and submit a compelling, compliant proposal on time. We provide the full support or full support services within that framework. And something that's really unique about Trident, I mentioned our military veterans and spouses and the fact that we provide 24/7 support, but we also have this flexible and scalable team that allows us to surge in and augment you where you need it. And we do have in our client portfolio, both small and large federal contractors. So we do some in the state and local realm. Our bread and butter is definitely the federal contracting landscape. And that's where we spend a lot of our time. So hope you can gain something from our insights. I am Rebecca Wayland. Obviously, this is my lovely co-host is Alexis Romero. She is our business intelligence lead at Trident. Super smart lady. She's also a business development and capture expert and one of our orals coaches. And if you joined any of these webinars before, you already know me. I'm the GWAC lead at Trident. Market research and proposal expert on the side. And then I'm one of the co-authors of Fast Prop, which is a book all about how to do proposals efficiently and effectively. And it's not about skipping steps, but it's about prioritizing steps and getting you to maximize your resources in usually a very compressed proposal calendar. So you can check that out on Amazon. But we're not here to talk about that today. We're going to dive in here with the Alliant program history. So you likely know that Alliant 3, right, it's in the name. This is the third iteration of the Alliant contract. It started back with Alliant 1. There was a small business track, a large business track. The first version of Alliant had about a $50 billion ceiling, and it was seeing about $4.6 billion of business every year. So started a little bit on the small side, grew pretty quickly. Alliant 1 transitioned to Alliant 2. Back in 2018, and originally they put a $50 billion ceiling on that too, and it's become very apparent, especially recently, that that's just not going to cut it. So, in fact, GSA recently increased the ceiling to $75 billion, but there's more to that story too, because Alliant 3 is already coming out, even though Alliant 2 was supposed to run through 2028. It's not going to make it. They are doing about $1 billion of business on this contract a month. So compare that to the very first iteration of Alliant that was doing $4.6 billion a year. Now we're burning $1 billion a month. And even with that $25 billion ceiling increase, GSA was looking at it and said, there's no way that this contract's going to have the runway that we need it to. So let's take a time out. Let's come out with the next iteration. Let's incorporate all of these lessons learned that we're seeing from other acquisition styles and make it a contract so that we get our bidders onboarded. We'll get a 10-year period, hopefully. And one of the biggest differences between Alliant 2 and Alliant 3 that is planned, not approved yet, is that they're removing the contract ceiling so that hopefully we don't have to go through the churn and the repeat effort of competing and getting onboarded and using this contract vehicle or starting from scratch, 5 years from now. So this is designed to be longer runtime, higher, in fact, no ceiling, but that is pending approval because we're still in the draft phase. So onto the opportunity itself, just to kind of orient you to the timeline and where we're at. So this is going to be a GWAC. It is multi-agency IDIQ. The core of Alliant, as you probably know, is information technology services. So Oasis is out there for the other professional integrated services. IT is really for Alliant. The Alliant 3 is going to be the unrestricted pool, basically. So this is for the large businesses. It's not, you don't have to be a large business to bid on this, but you will definitely have an advantage over the small businesses, and we'll talk about why in the coming slides. So if you're a small business and you provide IT services, that's really what Polaris is for. And you're probably tracking, that is wrapping up this week, actually. The Hub Zone and the Surface Disabled Veteran-Owned Small Business Pools are getting submitted on Friday, knock on wood, and that'll close out the first iteration of Polaris. They do plan on-ramps for that, so if you're a small business and you're thinking you missed the boat, you might not be out of luck just yet. Let this first round go through. We'll get through all the protests, learn the lessons, and then hopefully for the next on-ramp you can catch up there. The NICS code for Alliant 3 and for Polaris is 541512, so very, very centric in those IT services. And this is going to be a points-based scorecard that is heavily, heavily tied to experience, and we'll talk about that in more depth coming up. So obviously we got the draft RFP in October 2022. Feedback is due early January, and GSA has been a little bit squishy about the timeline from there on out. They said, well, okay, once we get the feedback in, we might give you an update on the release timeline in February, once we have a chance to digest anything, digest everything, see what changes are going to go into effect. And then they've said that the earliest release date they're really anticipating as being May of 2023. So it is highly, highly likely, I would say, that Oasis Plus and Alliant 3 are going to be out at the same time. So depending on what the capabilities of your company are, you might have to make some tough calls about where to allocate your resources. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go on to. So just from what's in this draft RFP, we do anticipate there being 6 volumes. This looks very, very similar to Polaris and Alliant 2, so we're not necessarily reinventing the wheel here, but there are some nuances that I want to draw your attention to. So we always have a general volume. The relevant experience and past performance is where the bulk of the points are going to come from. There is system certifications and clearances that are going to give you additional points on your scorecard. Organizational risk assessment is going to be something that definitely comes into play, and we'll talk about that when we talk about teaming. And then just responsibility, right? The GSA needs to make sure that you are a responsible offerer, that you're financially solvent, and that you're not going to bring any liability to the contract. So we'll, as it relates to the points, I mentioned this is a points-based scorecard. The maximum points is 91,200 points, which is not an easy number to work with as you're, adding things up here. But there, I'm sure, will be a self-scoring sheet. If GSA doesn't release one, Trident will. We did the same thing for Polaris to kind of help you aggregate points and evaluate your eligibility and your standing. So you can see that 66,000 points are coming from relevant experience and past performance, and that's about 73% of the total score. And this, they may adjust this a little bit, but I think you can expect that most of the points on this contract are going to come from proven experience, and there's some really specific qualifying criteria that we're going to talk about next. The system certifications and clearances, these are usually labeled as optional in the RFP, but they're critical. So optional, you're not required to have them, but your score is going to take a huge hit if you don't have a facility clearance, if you're not CMMI, if you don't have all the ISOs. So you're definitely going to want to take a look at that draft RFP. And if you have things that are in progress, you've still got time to get adjudicated and renewed and all of those wonderful things. And I would highly, highly recommend that you continue pursuing those audits, those certifications, because they're going to be worth it. And then organizational risk assessment. So this volume, if you're not familiar with it, this is really where you need to demonstrate to the government that you're not just forming teams for the sake of forming teams so that you look good on paper. GSA wants to see that you have proven experience working with the teammates that you're presenting to them, right? Everybody should be contributing something to the team. And the way the GSA evaluates whether or not you're going to be a good teammate is, have you worked together successfully before? And there's usually a lot of caveats with that, right? It's for Polaris, something that bidders were really struggling with is that you couldn't just be teammates from a previous contract. They wanted to see a prime sub relationship. So if you were proposing as the prime on Polaris and you had a teammate that was your subcontractor, in order to avoid a point penalty, you had to prove that you had been their prime and they had been your sub before. The transverse did not get you credit. If you were their sub and they were your prime, you didn't get the points. So this is definitely an area to watch. And it's 7,500 points, so it may not be fatal. On the other hand, on these points-based scorecards, what they tend to do is instead of publishing a minimum score, they will take the top scoring offers. So this is what we're seeing on Polaris, and it's a big difference between Polaris and Oasis Plus. Oasis Plus will publish a minimum threshold for points that you need to meet in order to qualify. And anybody that meets that minimum qualifying criteria, the minimum qualifying point score will get a contract award. That's not the case with Alliant and with Polaris. So please keep that in mind, as you know, every point helps, and you're getting graded on a curve. So you do just want to make sure that you're as competitive as possible on these points-based scorecards. Okay, so a couple areas to watch. I've highlighted these in orange. I expect that there's going to be a lot of changes or updated guidance, maybe clarification around these criteria. So I wouldn't necessarily take this as, you know, how it's going to stand forever in time. But it is good to know about what they're looking at right now in terms of qualifying experience. So right off the bat, you're going to be able to submit 7 relevant experience projects. You're going to have to make sure that they align to one of 5 NICS codes that are identified in the draft RFP. These are the same IT-centric NICS codes that we used in Polaris. So it's 518210, 541511, 541512, 541513, 541519. One difference that I've noticed, at least in the draft form, between Polaris and Alliant 3 is that on the project template form that GSA released, there's actually a space on these for a narrative describing how your project aligns to your claimed NICS code. So this can be really critical if you have something, let's just say on Seaport NextGen, where the NICS code might be 541330 because it's all engineering services, but it was really IT work. You'll have a paragraph, if it stands, to describe why you should get credit for that. So it'll still have to get signed off on by your government customer or by your prime if you're using subcontract work, but they are at least entertaining a narrative this time. They did not do that for Polaris. In terms of recency, what's going to qualify is you're going to be looking for projects that are either ongoing or were completed within the past 5 years. I expect that they will set a cutoff date just so that if there's extensions or, you know, if this draws out, I think that we're going to see, they'll mark a date and time, and you know that all of your experience needs to be from that point forward. They are looking at having a minimum of 1 year performance on whatever work you're doing. So or it needs to be complete. So sometimes there's a 6-month project or a 9-month project. It sounds like they're going to allow those to be submitted as long as they meet all of the other qualifying criteria. Right now, they have to be a minimum of $7.5 million in project size. And the range here is really interesting, right? So you will get additional points based on the size of your project. So they'll tier it out, you know, so it might be 7.5 million to 15 million, 15 to 50, and then, you know, 50 to 100. I don't know what those specific tiers are going to be. There are some draft categories in the RFP, but the highest scoring projects are going to be over $275 million. So remember what I was saying about if you're a small business, you're probably going to be disadvantaged. You're not going to have $275 million projects. So there are going to be some points that are inaccessible to you if you're trying to prime this as a small business. So we'll talk about options that you might have if you're in that situation. And then just rounding this out with, you know, the thing that's going to get you additional points is the complexity of your experience portfolio. So you'll get additional points if there's customer diversity, if you're doing cost reimbursement type contracts, the contract type, if it's a task order for multiple award federal IDIQ, that tends to yield more points. And then if you did something in a foreign location. And right now, there's some very interesting language in the draft RFP around foreign location. Sometimes you'll see this as OCONUS, which would mean that Hawaii and Alaska and the U.S. territories would count. Right now in the draft RFP, they are very specific that it needs to be a foreign location, so not a U.S. territory, so not Hawaii, not Alaska. And we'll just see if they modify that as we go. But it's important to know these things because one of the things you need to do right now is start looking at your experience portfolio and racking and stacking your projects to see, okay, what is eligible, do we think, and then what's going to be the highest scoring project so that you can maximize 73% of your scorecard using this relevant experience. Emerging technologies is going to be another type of experience that's evaluated on this proposal, and you're going to be permitted right now to submit 3 emerging technology projects. They might expand this. I'd be kind of surprised if they didn't, because right now they say there's 11 emerging technology areas. They actually have 13 listed in the draft RFP. So to only pick 3 of those would be, I think, I would be surprised if they only permitted 3. The qualifying criteria on this is the same when it comes to recency, right? So it's also going to need to be within the last 5 years, complete or 1 year minimum performance. But the size is much, much smaller. That's going to be only $1 million, and that's for the total project. So even if the emerging technology aspect of the contract was $250,000, if the total project was over $1 million, you can still use it. So they're not necessarily worried about carving out the specific percentage that the emerging technology represents. The language that we saw in Polaris was that it just needed to be integral to completion of the project. And then in the emerging technology category of experience, it sounds like you're going to be able to get additional points if you have small business engagement or if there's diversity in the emerging technologies that you cover. So you could submit 3 artificial intelligence projects, but you get more points if you could submit an artificial intelligence project, a big data project, and a cloud computing project, just as an example. And something to keep in mind is that when it comes to NICS code alignment and emerging technology alignment, you can't use one project to cover multiple areas. So if you have a project that did emerging technology that covered artificial intelligence and cybersecurity, you're going to have to pick one or the other to represent on that project. Same thing with NICS codes. If you did some facilities, some IT facilities management, but you also did some custom software design, you're not going to get credit for both NICS codes. You're going to have to pick either 541513 or 541511. That is something that has been consistent throughout the Alliant Polaris history. Okay, so some other considerations. Again, you don't have to be that large business, but your project size matters, and so does customer diversity. And those can just be really tough barriers for small businesses to meet and compete on. The optional systems and certifications, I mentioned this already, the ISO, the CMMI, facility clearance, and there's a lot more categories in Alliant 3 compared to Polaris. And I keep mentioning Polaris because, again, that's the small business track of Alliant, right? The Alliant 2 small business got canceled. It was heavily protested, had a lot of issues. That's where Polaris came from. But there will be some parallels in these programs. So it's important to know what was happening over here, because that will influence what they're able to do on the large business track. But there, again, expanded areas in this optional systems and certifications for the large businesses. So cost accounting systems, approved purchasing systems, cost estimating systems, forward pricing rate agreements, earned value management systems. And there may be tiers within these certification points based on who certified you. So some of them might be, it's only DCMA, DCAA audit approved. Some might permit a third party. We're just going to have to watch and see on that section of the RFP. Organizational risk assessment, again, so if you're just forming a team because you look good on paper and you're trying to maximize points, you can do that, but you can expect to take a 7,500 point penalty if you're proposing new teammates or if you're proposing a relationship that you haven't executed before. We do expect that you will need to submit a supply chain risk management plan. This is something that the GSA is very concerned about. Same thing with the cybersecurity plan. It might be a cybersecurity supply chain risk management plan. Where you have to, describe how you're safeguarding products as they move and maintaining your supply chain. There will be an individual subcontracting plan required for all large businesses. So if you're a small business, I want you to pay attention to this table on the right, because these are the proposed goals that are going to be set for the contract. So large businesses are going to need to team with small businesses, women-owned small businesses, hub zones, veteran-owned small businesses. So if you've got one of those socioeconomic set-asides, you might be able to add real value as a teammate in helping a strong prime round out their portfolio and meet the goals. Now, we don't think there's going to be a price volume, but you will need to probably submit the salary ranges for the designated LCATs, and those have been released in the draft RFP as well. So don't get caught off guard by that. Something that we've seen definitely trending on the GWAC landscape is that they're not doing cost volumes at the IDIQ level. All of the pricing is handled at the task order level. So things can get really competitive once you actually get the IDIQ. So you'll hear us say this again and again through these series. Getting on the IDIQ is just the first step. It's an invitation to work, right? Because you're going to have to stay competitive to actually win task orders on these IDIQs and to avoid any off ramp, right? So you're going to need to meet your minimum performance. We'll talk a little bit more about that after the market insights. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Alexis, and she's going to fill you in on some things that we saw with Alliant too. So Alexis, over to you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Lots and lots of info there, right? So if you're joining this because you're curious and you want to know, is Alliant 3 right for my company? Is it right for me? There's a couple of things that we'd like you to consider. So as a business analyst, whenever I'm meeting with a client, whether it's a large or a small, we have to ask ourselves, is this vehicle right for us? And luckily with Alliant, the data from Alliant 2 is readily available for everybody. So it is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to really take the data and interpret what it's telling us or you as a potential bidder on this vehicle. So with that, I'm just going to jump into a little bit of a taste of that so you can get an idea of what you should be looking at and thinking about when you're making that decision to pursue or not pursue. So Alliant 2 really became the government's best-in-class procurement vehicle for IT services and IT services based solutions. So we can say very confidently that we can expect the same from Alliant 3, right? So it is a vehicle that is important. And if you are in the IT services business, this really is something you need to look at and really think about. So to determine if it's right for you, my recommendation as an analyst is you need to start by asking yourself 2 questions. Are the federal business agencies or bureaus that align to my strategic interests using Alliant 2? So if you're really focusing on one market or 2, and you have just a very niche customer base, are they using Alliant 2 or are they going to use Alliant 3? And, if they're not, then do you want to go look for another, potential market to infiltrate? And would this be the best vehicle for you to do so? The next question is, are companies similar in size and service offering or portfolio like mine, you getting work on Alliant 2? Because that's a really good indicator. If you haven't been on this vehicle before and you don't know if it's worth the trouble or the effort, you really need to see who else is already getting this work in these task orders. And if you recognize some of your either teammates or competitors in your similar company size and portfolio, then it's a good indicator that this is a right vehicle for you. And then I always add a bonus question to everybody is, especially companies that are maybe large, but on the smaller size of large or actually small businesses, are these past, companies on Alliant 2, where did they really get a sizable return on what I like to call their proposal investment? For some companies, picking one vehicle means not being able to pursue another one. So we want to make sure that you allocate your resources accordingly and that you are getting a good return on that proposal investment, because the proposal investment is the time, the money, the resource, the people, and everything that goes into getting all these scorecards and everything ready and these, teaming agreements, et cetera, et cetera. It does take time and it does take money. So we want to make sure that you're getting your money, you're getting your return on your investment. So I do recommend for those of you here, if you haven't done so already, you should go to the GSA website and look at their GSA Fast GWAC sales dashboard. It includes all the data from Alliant 2, and it is a strong indicator of what Alliant 3 is gonna look like for you. So on these slides, remember I asked, what federal agencies are using Alliant 2. So in these next 2 slides, I'm just giving you the top 20. I don't we can't go through all of them here during this webinar, but of course, the dashboard's there for you to look and examine and play with that. But interesting tidbits of information is, Department of the Army, Air Force, Department of Defense, the IRS, Homeland Security has a lot of task orders here in different bureaus. So I broke it down between federal agency and bureau. So if you recognize one that you're really interested, these are the top 10. And you can see that the obligated sales are significantly high. So they are, and the task orders for a lot of them, they're putting a lot of task orders out there. So that's a really strong indicator. And for those who have less task orders, the value of the task order is high. So there is a good return on that proposal investment indicator. And the next batch, the 11 to 20, is still a really interesting group of federal agencies. For those of you, you see Defense Intelligence Agency, which is usually a hard one to find, but it's there. It's putting work out there. And again, Homeland Security. You don't see a lot of Navy. In the top 20, the only Navy organization that popped up is NavAir. So that's interesting to know. If you have, if you're in San Diego and your market is primarily like Navy and specifically, I don't know, NAVOR, then this might not be the right vehicle for you. For example, if you're looking for Space Force Space Com work, which is coming up, you got to really determine if it's getting put on this vehicle or Oasis vehicle. So those are more, down in the weeds kind of questions, but those are the types of things we try to help our customers understand and identify so that they can pick, should I go Alliant? Should I go Oasis? But this gives you a really good idea. And then the other question we asked, right, is like, are other companies like mine getting work on this vehicle? And if so, how much are they getting from that? These are the top 20 contractors or industry partners, as they're labeled on GSA website on Alliant 2. As you can see, these are the big names, right? We all recognize the top vendors here. And so, yeah, they are making a good chunk of money on this vehicle and they're getting a lot of task orders. So it is the kind of rationale is if you're a big company and you want to compete against these companies, now if you're a smaller company or actually a small business, these are, if these were maybe companies that you've done a lot of sub work to and you have that relationship and you have that past performance, now maybe you should be reaching out to see if you can become one of those small businesses that are going to help them with, their subcontracting goals. So lots of fun information and data for you to explore on that dashboard. So I highly, highly recommend that you go play with that. I also wanted to include the bottom 20. And the reason why I wanted to show that is because I wanted to know, like, okay, the companies that really didn't get a lot of work out of this, did they still get a return on low proposal investment? And as you can see, even for the bottom 20, they still made a very sizable return on their proposal investment. So it is worth it if you do have, everything to put all your resources into this proposal effort. It does pay off, and it pays off for pretty much almost everybody. So that's an interesting tidbit that I found in looking at the data on a very high level basis, right? And this slide, I'll turn back to Rebecca on. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Alexis. Really good insights. And like she said, the GSA GWAC dashboard is a fantastic resource. If you're not on there snooping about who's doing what, and you have some free time, check it out. You can get a lot of great intel. And if you need help understanding anything you see there, you can also reach to Trident. We'd be happy to work with you on that and talk through what the competitive intelligence means for your position. Okay, so we've been kind of dancing around this, Oasis Plus or Alliant 3. And the reason that this is even a question is because we acknowledge there is some overlap in what companies provide, right? Very few companies are doing only IT. That's just not the nature of services these days. So you might have qualifying work for both Oasis Plus and Alliant 3. So the first thing you need to consider if it has to be one or the other is, does it have to be one or the other, right? Do you have enough? You can use projects for Oasis Plus to qualify and Alliant 3. There's not going to be prohibitions there, but where does it make sense to spend your time? Which contracts align best to your company's capabilities and your experience that you can prove? Because they're both experience-based evaluations. So your NICS codes on your projects matter. Your project size matters. And those might be driving factors that help you see where you're going to score better and be more competitive. If you're trying to make the decision between Oasis Plus and Alliant Small Business, your socioeconomic status probably gets a vote here, right? So Oasis Plus, they are planning to have multiple IDIQs for a small business award, for a woman-owned small business pool, for a service-disabled veteran-owned small business pool, for HubZone, and then for the disadvantaged businesses. There's going to be distinct IDIQs set out for all of those categories, whereas Alliant 3 just has small business goals. So it'll be unrestricted, right? No determination on size or restrictions on size for who can compete. But as we talked about, if you don't have those $275 million projects, you're not going to go up against the Deloittes and the Booz Allens and the SAICs. You're just not going to score as high as they do. So no dedicated small business pools within Alliant. That's what Polaris is. And there will be on-ramps there, but they will need small businesses on teams to make Alliant 3 successful. And then just like Alexis got done talking to you about, you really have to think through who are your target customers and what are your business development goals, because the IDIQ, getting this GWAC, getting this first contract award is just an invitation to do more work. You have to have a strategy in place for who are we going to pursue? How are we going to drive business to this contract? That's something that is spelled out very clearly in all of the GSA RFPs, is they want to see a dedicated program manager who's going to be able to talk intelligently about this acquisition pathway and bring federal customers to it. So it's not just a matter of you get on the contract, step one is get the contract award, step 2 is profit. There's a lot of little steps in between there to make sure that you are positioned for long-term success. And so we just don't want to see anybody spend all this time and these resources and these hopefully not headaches and tears, but let's be honest, that usually accompanies the process to get a very low return on investment. So if you're going to do it, make sure that you build this into your business strategy now while you have the time and the runway to do that. Because we're still in a draft phase. That's the beauty of this timeline and you wonderful people who are prepping and getting your heads in the game early. So with that being said, some key takeaways. Let's expect some changes, right? That's going to be the only constant. Is we know that the first draft is just that, and I know that for project criteria that's probably going to change. There's usually a lot of conversation around contractor teaming agreements or arrangements, right? So JVs, mentor proteges, what's going to be allowed, what's not allowed. What are you going to need to submit to prove that you've teamed with your named team before? And we can expect that GSA is watching, as is industry, all of these other acquisitions that are going on right now, right? We're learning lessons from Polaris. We're learning lessons from Oasis Plus. And I think that if there are major roadblocks thrown up there or protests, GSA is going to do what they can to continuously improve and make sure that Alliant 3 doesn't suffer the same fate as some of the other things that we've seen happen just in the marketplace. Smart teaming, I cannot emphasize this enough. That organizational risk assessment is not nothing, right? It's 7,000 points doesn't sound like a lot in the context, 7,500 points doesn't sound like a lot in the context of 91,000 points, but because you're getting graded on that curve, every little point is going to matter. So while you have time, right, if you're a small business and you're hoping to get on the team, take a look at this organizational risk assessment section and see what the criteria are and talk to your primes now about getting some work today so that when you go to propose on Alliant 3, you've already got this proven relationship and it's not just, well, we bid together on an IDIQ, but we haven't won any task orders. Usually that's not enough to qualify or meet the standard for actual performance. So if you're a large business prime, a lot of qualified small businesses out there, there's going to be a lot of people who just went through this paperwork drill to get ready for Polaris and have probably got their documents all marked up. And if you're going to be a benevolent prime, my guess is you can talk to a lot of these really qualified small businesses who maybe just didn't have a score on Polaris, but have really good projects and experience and capabilities, right? Because let's keep this forward thinking, who are actually going to be good teammates for you and be value added, not just bump up your scorecard. Ideally, they'll do both. And you can expect that you're going to have to meet these small business goals. You have to be thinking about, okay, what does my portfolio of teammates look like, and how am I going to meet these criteria? Because right now, if you look at the language, you're going to be able to propose your own goals, but GSA has told you what the answer to the test is, right? So you're going to need to get pretty darn close to those quotas if you want to be competitive. If you're a small business teammate, this is a really great, these GWACs are great areas for you to build your experience portfolio if you have a good prime. So if you can get some decent work shares and get your foot in the door, get your name recognized by these government agencies, this is the time to do that. And the emerging tech matters. Like small businesses sometimes can adapt to what's being demanded in the marketplace quicker than the large businesses. So if you've got a really niche capability that fits one of those 11 or 13 emerging technology areas, depending on how you count, start having the conversations with potential primes so that they can see the value that you bring. And for everybody, if you're paying attention to Alliant 3 at all, if you've been tuned in, definitely start gathering and evaluating your projects now. It can be really tricky to try to fit the pieces together to have the evidence that you need to submit that actually qualifies based on the criteria in the draft RFP. Or it'll be the final RFP. But there's some really specific guidance around you can't just claim that you did this. You have to prove that you did this. So what does the statement of work actually say? If your project is coded in something in FPDS that's not one of those 5 NICS codes, how are you going to make the case that you actually did IT service work on that project? If it's clear, or if it's clearly spelled out in the statement of work, it's not a done deal, but it's an easier deal than if you're trying to claim something it's buried in between the subtext of 2 task areas. So just take a look at that evidence. It's really illuminating sometimes to see what makes it into the fine print of your own contract documentation. And sometimes what we found is that there's just a lot of stovepipes in companies where maybe the CPARs live over here, but the client advocates are over here, and the program team that's actually doing the delivery is over here. And each one of those branches has something that needs to get turned in for the actual proposal submission. So start those conversations early and have backups, because there's going to be some adjustments to these project qualifying criteria, we're pretty sure. So you might have something that falls out of contention or that gets a big points boost because all of a sudden, the value criteria changes and it's not $275 million anymore. Now you can max out with a $100 million project. Those changes are what we see people spending time on as they're evaluating their score and where the most kind of dynamic changes are happening as this solicitation goes on. So yeah, just make sure you're gathering evidence and make sure it matches and says what you think it actually says. Saw a lot of bidders really frustrated on Polaris when they tried to make the paperwork match their claims. So with that, if you do have any questions, we will post this. We'll post a recording of this webinar. Our contact information is here. It's really easy to remember. It's just Rebecca at Trident Proposals or Alexis at Trident Proposals. If you checked out our website, you'll see we have a ton of Polaris tools. We have Oasis Plus. We're going to start building out Alliant 3 as we get more and more information. So we hope that you will subscribe to our webinar series. We're doing these, we try to do them twice a month, but we only want to meet if there's something to talk about. So I think we're going to be shifting focus here to Oasis Plus pretty soon. Now that we have that draft RFP to work with. So if you do have any questions, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to assist you guys, have a conversation about what makes sense for your company, and then go from there. I will hang on a little bit. We've got about 17 minutes in our block time left. So if there are any questions that people have, I'm happy to stay behind. But otherwise, Alexis, anything to close us out?
No, thanks, Rebecca. I just wanted to say if anybody here really wants to play with the dashboard or has any questions, and I'm happy to give you a little bit of a walkthrough, send me an email or we can set up a call. This is a very critical point. If you're doing the work this early on, that means that you really do want to determine if this is right for you or not. We're happy to do those kinds of discovery calls and say, hey, think about this, think about that. So you all have my email, and I'm happy to answer any questions. So I'll stay around too for a little bit.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone.